in Lloydminster right now. Almost.
Hi, I'm Jody Robson in Regina. You're listening to Blue Sky. We are broadcasting from 102.5 FM in Treaty 4 territory around Regina, 94.1 FM in Treaty 6 territory near Saskatoon, and 540 on the AM dial all across the province.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Blue Sky, whether you're listening on the radio or if you're watching us live on the CBC Saskatchewan YouTube channel this afternoon. Catholicism is the most prominent religion in Saskatchewan. During the last census, nearly 1 in 4 people here reported to be Catholic. And it's not just Catholics who are eagerly anticipating the selection of the next pope. There are betting sites dedicated to making predictions for who will be chosen. 2/3 of the cardinals have to agree, and it takes as long as it takes. One conclave in the 13th century took nearly 3 years. Others took just 1 day. Pope Francis was elected on the second day in the 5th ballot. It's an ancient tradition, and a lot of people are watching. And the men that will be chosen from that group of cardinals, it's more diverse than ever. He will become one of the world's most important leaders, chosen as Supreme Pontiff of an estimated 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide. So what do you need to know about what's happening? We have a great panel of experts standing by to help with that. If you have thoughts on this or the legacy of Pope Francis, or maybe what you're hoping to see in the next pope, call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. So let's get to that panel, shall we? Joining me in our Regina studio is a familiar voice, a familiar face, Archbishop Donald J. Boland. Don Boland, as I think most would know you. Welcome back to Blue Sky.
Thanks very much.
And we have two guests joining us remotely. Harry LaFond is a deacon with the Catholic Church. He's also the former chief of Muskeg Lake Cree Nation and former executive director of the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. Another familiar face and voice. Welcome to Blue Sky, Deacon LaFond.
Good to be here.
And Reid Laughlin is an associate professor of Christianity and culture at St. Michael's College at the University of Toronto. I talked with Reid last week on the morning edition and thought, oh my goodness, he needs to come back for this show because I could easily talk to him for an hour about all things Catholic Church and the Pope. So welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
And I think all three of you actually know each other in some capacity as well. So this should be a great conversation. Yeah. Smiles all around. Okay. Some of our listeners will know a lot about how the next pope is chosen. Some of our listeners will know nothing. So over the course of the show, we're hoping to break this down. But let's start with talking about the last pope, Pope Francis. He was the Latin pope. I'm curious from each of you how you think his legacy will be remembered. Deacon LaFond, I'll start with you.
I think good memories. I think he's left us quite a legacy of memories to work from, specifically with the Indigenous people that he encountered over the time that he was Pope. He was especially known for his willingness to listen and to converse and to engage with very common people. And I think when we sit and reflect and think about where we come from, those are the thoughts that are going to, I think, come to the fore, to energize us, in looking into the future.
Archbishop Boland, what about you? What will you remember or think you'll remember the most about Pope Francis?
Well, I remember a lot. I mean, his focus on God's mercy, probably the most important thing of all, because it shaped everything he did. He really understood God in a very foundational way as looking upon human beings with great mercy and compassion. And so that shaped everything in his pontificate. He put out a book called The Name of God is Mercy. So next, I would say the simplicity by which he exercised his ministry and the way he lived. From the first moment he was elected as Pope, I was struck by an interview he did, I think on the third day, where he said he chose the name Francis. He wanted to speak of peace. He wanted to embody a kind of a gospel simplicity. I liked the way he did an interview right at the start of his pontificate where he talked about his own failings in the past and his own struggles. So we got a sense of a human being who, hadn't lived a perfect life, had struggles, and had persevered. And so I really appreciated that. I appreciated his choice of not living in the Apostolic Palace, but in an apartment in the Vatican. Then I think his outreach, his focus on justice and on the peripheries, that was just such a major part of his legacy. He was so concerned to reach out to those in need. And a part of that was speaking into issues of peace and war and really giving a prophetic voice, calling the world to peace. One particular story comes to mind where he and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the leader of the Presbyterian Church in Scotland together invited South Sudanese leaders who were at war with each other to the Vatican for a retreat. And at the end of that retreat, Francis kissed their feet, really summoning them to be servant leaders. Next, I would say his commitment to dialogue. Early in his pontificate, he was asked in Brazil, what do we most need? And he said, dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. And I've had the chance to work in ecumenical dialogue that he strongly supported. He's also been very engaged in interfaith dialogue. Reed will be the expert on that question. And just committing the church to be facing the world ready for dialogue. Lastly, I think the key part of his legacy will be the focus on what we call synodality, walking together, which is really a way of exercising leadership, which is very consultative, which wants to draw all people in the church into the conversation, those outside the church who are impacted by the church's decisions into the conversation, and then discerning together what needs to be done. And then the hierarchical dimension of the church takes over and says, well, this is what we're going to do, but not after this extensive dialogue and consultation. I think those are all big parts of his legacy.
Did you ever have an audience with the Pope?
Yeah, well, I met him on several occasions with ecumenical dialogues. I co-chair an international ecumenical dialogue, and we had very good sessions with him. Then in the context of the Western bishops having an ad limina meeting with the Pope, and he spent 3 hours with us, and I had a chance to speak in that context, and it was precisely about the question of Call to Action 58 and the value of his coming to Canada. And then in the context of justice work, I had the chance to meet with him as well, but not deep one-on-one conversations.
I was going to say, did you ever have a conversation where he was himself and not the Pope proper? No. Or was it was always very formal meetings? Okay. Deacon LaFawn, before I move on to Reed, did you ever have audience conversations with Pope Francis?
No, I participated in the Mass in Edmonton as a deacon, and was given the role of standing next to the bishop, to the Pope. However, we everything was so orchestrated that it was impossible to have a conversation.
There's a lot of people involved with those masses, I can imagine. Reed, there's the study of Catholicism and the church and everything, and then there's the pop culture version of the legacy. I think we've heard about some of the serious side, but can you talk about one, what you'll remember from the serious side, but also on the pop culture front, because he is a world leader and he is, whether you're Catholic or not, someone that people know.
Right. So, I mean, on the serious front, first of all, I'll echo most of what Deacon Lafond and Archbishop Boland have said about his legacy. In terms of how that intersects with my own work, I work on sort of interreligious dialogue. And I mean, I think that for me, on the serious side, one of the things that is most important for me is his conviction, which he stated in one of his early documents, that reality is more important than ideas. And that is really bad news for me as a theologian, right? I work in ideas, so he's deprioritizing the kind of thing I do, but very good for me as a Catholic, right? I mean, I think that sometimes he would frustrate people because he wasn't sort of theoretically, he wasn't as concerned that one had to have a clearly articulated idea of what one was doing. It was much more important that one encounter people where they are, and I think that was extremely powerful. Difficult for me as a kind of control freak, and I think that we saw some of that in the reactions to Francis. But I think beautiful and stirring and inspiring. In terms of popular culture, I mean, I'm not somebody who has my finger on the pulse in many ways. I'm an academic, so I get things secondhand. But people have been asking me about this movie Conclave, which I haven't seen. Right, so my daughter is 5 years old, so I've seen. You can guess the kind of movies that I've seen recently. But there was actually a movie that came out, I think it was a Netflix movie a few years ago, called, I think, The Two Popes, or it was called Benedict and Francis. And I thought that was a really interesting sort of representation of perceptions of the church, which was maybe unexpected, which was the premise of the movie. It was a fictionalized account, but based on people looking at these two figures, Benedict and Francis. Of course, they are odd figures in the sense that we had two popes at the same time, one emeritus and one holding the office. But I think that one of the things that was really interesting about the representation of Benedict and Francis in that movie, which is it's a lovely movie, it's funny, was that they were able to appreciate one another as different. That there were two people who were very different in that film. They were represented as two people who were very different and appreciated that difference. And also that they both loved soccer, right, or football. And so I thought that was a beautiful representation, and I think did capture something about Francis's legacy, particularly in dialogue, which is that to say that he represented a way of sort of with other Christians, but also I worked for many years on the Hindu-Catholic dialogue, that he really suggested that we could navigate the world by saying, I love you and I respect you, not despite the fact that we're different, but because we're different, and even where we disagree. And I think that it was nice to see that was represented in popular culture in some entertaining ways. Archbishop
Boland, have you seen Conclave?
I did, yes.
What did you think of it?
Well, it's a very well-made film and very well acted. Ray Fiennes and Stanley Tucci, John Lithgow. I mean, they're a great cast. Isabella Rossellini. It was gripping. You don't get bored during that film. I appreciated the depiction of the cardinals as human beings who were largely trying to be faithful and to discern, but also who had faults or flaws, and I think the director gives you the sense in the film that the Holy Spirit is guiding through all this humanity, is guiding the choice. I thought the ending was bizarre, but that's there we go.
Deacon Lafond, do you think that movies that bring the church into them, fictionalizing these stories, do you think they're helpful for bringing the church into mainstream conversation?
I think so. I think that I didn't see the movie Conclave, but I did see the other one, and I found it humanized the two individuals, and when you can't get any more human than watching the same soccer game and cheering for your side of the win. Yes, I think movies are an important medium for us to appreciate an awareness, creating an awareness of people, and and adding perspectives that make us think and speculate, on the Catholic Church.
We want to hear from you as well. 1-800-716-2221 or send us an email, bluesky@cbc.ca, whether you have thoughts on the legacy of Pope Francis or maybe you have thoughts on what you're looking for in a new pope. Before we move on to the new pope, Deacon LaFond, in April of 2022, Pope Francis made a long-awaited apology to a Canadian delegation of Inuit, First Nations, and Métis leaders at the Vatican for the, quote, deplorable violations children suffered at Catholic-run Indian residential schools for more than a century. Then he came to Canada, which Archbishop Boland and you both referenced, to apologize in person. How significant was this?
I think it was significant because what it did was take a close look at the elephant in the room. We had been, both the church and Indigenous people had been circling the issue and trying to put a name to it and trying to put a conversation to it. And I think it required the Pope to bring reality to the apologies that had been made previous to that by different religious orders and different groups in the Catholic Church. We have to realize, that the Pope holds a special place in the hearts of Indigenous people, always has, and probably will always be there. And so we have to pay attention to that when we are working to try to get a dialogue happening or, rebuilding a relationship. All of those things are important. I just wanted to add one other legacy item that hasn't been brought forward to this point. Mm-hmm. And that's the Pope's understanding of the relationship to the world that we live in. The Laudato Si was, I think, a piece of work that really spoke to Indigenous thinking about the world that we live in, that it's a living, organic part of creation that's important, and we need to pay attention to it because it holds our future. It's part of our work as human beings. We need to take care of it, and he was very clear about his understanding of God's creation from that perspective.
Deacon LaFond, you've also said the Catholic Church needs to change the way it thinks about Indigenous people. What changes would you like to see? What do you mean by that?
What do I mean? I've always had a sense that the Catholic Church was going down a road that in many ways ignored the reality of what the Catholic Church should be, what Christ's teachings about human relations. The Cree people believe very strongly in Wakokwen, which is, relationship building, and it's the foundational piece. And so I think if we're going to live out our Cree way of believing, then the Catholic Church has to change its approach with us. The dialogue has to be real. We need to deal with our beliefs and find the common road that Christ wants us to discover, despite the different languages and the different eyes that we see we see each other with, so if we're going to rebuild the relationship here in Canada, then the change has to be coming from both parties. We have to get to a point of dialogue here and conversation that seeks a future and builds a vision that is based on mutual respect, mutual trust, and an understanding that God's plan comes in many different languages.
I see you're all nodding along. Thank you for that, Deacon LaFond. I'm going to take a brief pause here, and I'm going to check in with David Shield, who's standing by, with a quick update on what our newsroom is working on this hour. David?
Hi, Sam. Clouds of thick black smoke filled the air in Saskatoon this morning. A plastics manufacturing plant caught fire in the city's north end. The city's deputy chief says one side of the building was completely engulfed. The Riders rookie camp starts today. A pair of U of S Huskies selected in last week's CFL draft are there. So are two players from the Saskatoon Hilltops. And it's a windy day in the Swift Current area. That area is seeing wind gusts of up to 90 kilometers an hour right now. Roof and window damage is possible. And I'll have a full newscast for you coming up at 1 o'clock.
Thanks, David.
You're welcome.
The CBC's David Shield. I'm Sam McKeag. You're listening to Blue Sky, and today we are talking about choosing the next pope, the legacy of Pope Francis, and where the Catholic Church has room to grow. And as we are doing this, we're sitting in a studio in Regina. We're live streaming on YouTube and as well on the radio. And there is, if you see me turning my head, it's because we're watching a chimney. We are watching a chimney that comes out of the Sistine Chapel. White smoke means the vote is done and they have selected a new pope. Black smoke means they didn't get the votes and they have to vote again. My guests are Archbishop Don Bolin from Regina, Deacon Harry LaFond, and Reid Laughlin, who's a professor of Christianity and culture out of the University of Toronto. We've talked a little bit about Pope Francis. I now want to turn and look toward the future of what the church could be, led by whoever gets voted in. I find this fascinating. Before we get into how this is selected, I want to talk a little bit about the odds and who these people are that are voting, because a lot of these cardinals will have never met each other before. Pope Francis was not even near the top of the odds makers list in 2013. He was as high as 33-1 to be elected at one book in Ireland, behind as many as 15 other candidates. Pope John Paul II was not considered to be one of top two candidates for the papacy in October of 1978. And many of these voters are doing this for the first time. You all have been watching over the years as popes are selected, as members of the Catholic Church. I'm curious, Reid, I will ask you first, how easy is it to predict who will become pope?
I mean, I consider it a sort of a wasted pursuit to be making those guesses. First of all, I should point out, just as a historical matter, that they don't have to choose a cardinal, right? So in theory, they can choose any baptized man. So any of the three of us on this panel might get a call in a few minutes, and then maybe that's why there hasn't been any smoke yet, because they have to actually get the agreement of whoever they elect. But obviously, that's incredibly unlikely. I mean, I think that it's always hard, and there's a famous saying that the person who enters a pope leaves a cardinal. That oftentimes it's the top contenders, the people who are perceived as being most likely, who are not elected. And one of the reasons that happens is that people tend to have a ceiling of votes. I guess we understand from past conclaves that sometimes somebody got the most votes on the first vote, but then that was all the votes they were ever going to get, right? So then eventually people move on, right? They're like, this isn't going to happen. And so for me, it's more interesting to think about rather than particular people. And I think we're more in the dark now. But even in 2005, when Benedict was elected, Joseph Ratzinger was elected as Pope Benedict, the way people were talking about it was like, he's the clear front runner. But they didn't even know what to do with that. They were like, based on history, maybe that means he's the least likely to be elected, right? Like that, based on this history, and it turned out that he was elected. So, but for me, I mean, the interesting question is, similarity and differences. And so, another famous saying is that after a thin pope, you get a fat pope. That there's an interest in sort of electing somebody who's different. But one could imagine this difference working out in different ways, right? So one of the things that somebody pointed out is that if you look at the last few popes, John Paul II was very much a larger-than-life figure. Or sorry, John the 23rd was very much a larger-than-life figure. Paul VI was a much more austere figure who was ideologically aligned with John the 23rd, was a very different personality. Same thing with John Paul II and Benedict. So one could imagine an election in which they're picking somebody who's going to bring forward the Francis legacy, but is temperamentally very different. One can also imagine somebody who has a very similar temperament, but a very different sort of set of priorities for the church. And so I think either of those are possible.
Deacon LaFond, or as you're watching the next leader of the church to be chosen, do you have favorites?
No, not really. Not really. I'm of the opinion that we should just let the Holy Spirit do His work and give us a nice surprise at the end of all that work. I think just on a personal note, I hope that we get a pope who can continue the organic nature of the church as it's been set out by his predecessors. Each of those popes has had strengths, and they've brought that into the work of the pope, and they've made it real, and we've been the recipients of that hard work in a good way. It's challenged us. Pope Francis challenged us in one way. Pope John Paul challenged us in another way, and Pope Benedict, he was a scholar. He had a different set of skill sets to offer, and he brought that into the work, and all of those things. We became beneficiaries of their talents, and that's where my trust lies. That the Holy Spirit will do the work that's required with these cardinals. That they will pick a person who will bring strong gifts into the Catholic Church that'll help us grow and continue to be develop as followers of Christ.
What do you do if you don't agree with the plans, the positioning, the priorities of the next pope?
It's like any other leadership that we encounter with us. We never fully agree with their priorities, because we're all typical human beings and feel that we know better. But part of being humble, which is another one of Christ's teachings, and it's also a very strong Indigenous teaching, is humility. Being humble enough to, but also expressing, having the courage to express what you disagree with, and discovering a way to common ground, so that you can continue to function as a family, as a large family.
Okay, Archbishop Bolin, lay it out for me. How does a person become pope? What is the process? We're all watching this tiny chimney.
Right.
What is going on? We have a group of men who are now locked behind doors. Let's start with, what was the vow of silence they took today, and how do things proceed from here?
Right. Well, I mean, I think when they process into the Sistine Chapel, or maybe the vow of silence takes place in a different chapel, I think, they take a promise that they're not going to be influenced by outside forces, that they're going to not communicate the internal discussions in the conclave. There's a couple of other things that they promise. I think you need to take one step back, because I think the last 10 days, 2 weeks have been very important. What they've been doing is having discussions about what the world needs right now, what the church needs right now, and what kind of leadership, and where's the Holy Spirit leading us? What is God asking of us at this time? And that's a really important part of the discernment. So what they're doing now, as they begin the voting process, is built on what they've shared and heard over the past couple of weeks. And it's been interesting reading interviews of various cardinals over the past couple of weeks, because they've shared fairly deeply what they sense the world needs right now. And it's different in different places. There was a powerful testimony from Cardinal Bo from Myanmar, saying this world is in a state of deep crisis, in Myanmar, in Gaza, in the Ukraine. He said there are 6 major wars going on, 20 smaller wars going on. There are hundreds of millions of displaced persons and refugees. There's a political crisis, a crisis of leadership. This world needs moral authority. It needs faith leaders who can speak into that. And I thought that was a really powerful testimony. So I think right now they're starting the process of voting. They will vote once today. I think they can choose actually not to vote today, but they're very likely to vote once. And then the process begins in a more systematic way tomorrow. There will be 2 votes. And if there's an election of a pope, a 2/3 majority at any point, then the white smoke goes up. The person is asked, would they accept? And presumably there would have been a way of communicating that they weren't going to accept beforehand if that was the case. But, it's a request. But if there's no election after the first 2 votes in the morning, then black smoke comes out of the chimney, and there would be 2 more votes later in the day. And of course, after the first one, if after the first one there's an election, it's white smoke. But there isn't black smoke after the first of those 2 votes in the morning or late afternoon. So that proceeds until we have a 2/3 majority. I believe that there is a day off somewhere in there after a few days. And if after 30 votes there is no election, then it goes down to 2 candidates. But it still needs a 2/3 majority, as I understand.
That sounds like sudden death over time. Where do they sleep?
They stay at Santa Marta, which is in fact the residence on the Vatican grounds where Pope Francis had his apartment. And so they cross over to the Sistine Chapel each day where they continue to meet.
So this isn't a case of they're literally locked in a room until they make a decision?
No.
Okay.
No.
And is it seen as, we heard Deacon LaFawn talk about being humble and humility. Are people angling to become pope? Choose me, I'm good because, which wouldn't be seen as humble or showing humility. Is that something that cardinals would do?
Well, God knows we're all human beings, and it's not inhuman to have a little bit of ambition, especially if you sense that God has been leading you in a certain way. But I would think the majority would ask the Lord not to choose me. I loved an interview with Cardinal Chow, who is a Jesuit from Hong Kong, this week, and I know him because we worked together on international Anglican Roman Catholic relations. And he was asked, in a discreet way about if he was elected. And he said, "Oh, I have no worries because A, I don't speak Italian, and B, I'm a Jesuit. I don't think they're going to be ready to vote for another Jesuit for quite a while." So,
let's talk about the makeup of the conclave, because in 2013, Reed, I'll go to you on this one just so people don't forget that you're there.
That would be fun.
In 2013, the conclave that elected Pope Francis, cardinals from Europe made up 52% of the electorate, with a smaller representation from Latin America at 16%, North America at 12%, Africa at 10%, and Asia Pacific at 10%. Today, according to the Vatican press office, Europe's representation is down to 39%. Latin America is at 16%. North America is the same at 12%. Africa, 13%. And Asia Pacific is up to 20%. How likely will it be for us to have another pope that comes from outside of Europe?
I mean, again, I'm reluctant, like all of us, I'm reluctant to put probabilities or anything on all of this. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we did, right? So I think we've gotten to the point that if somebody's elected from Asia or Africa or somebody else from Latin America, I don't think anybody would be like, oh my gosh, that's impossible, right? I think that if we think of it as sort of an Overton window or a glass ceiling, like the ceiling has been broken. So now I think we accept that the Pope could come from anywhere. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of the names that have circulated have been sort of Italians, and some of them have been Europeans from outside of Italy. Many of them have been people, though, whose ecclesiastical careers are elsewhere. So this is one of the things that's complicated. So one of the Italians that people are talking about spent almost all of his career in Latin America. And so they're like, this is a person who might be appealing because he's not perceived as Italian. He's perceived as somebody who has deep roots in another part of the world. And so, I don't know. I mean, I think it's really hard to, it's we trust both the politics and the gift of the Holy Spirit to do this discernment. But I do think it's true that we're past the point where that would be a dramatic, wowing thing. I mean, there would be some commentary about it, but I think we'd be like, well, okay, this is what's happened now. We've passed into this era in the church where the Pope could literally come from anywhere. I
think the reason I ask is not so much for the wow factor, but in a what does the world need right now factor, in terms of, as Archbishop Boland was alluding to, all of the geopolitical problems we have going on in the world right now. I guess I would ask you, is there benefit to having someone outside the Vatican bubble?
Yes. I mean, I think that, among the interviews I read, I had several comment on, this vote is not about a nationality. We're not saying, well, it's time for an Italian again. It's time for somebody from Asia now. It's about who is going to offer the kind of leadership for a world church, addressing the world's needs right now. And I think the next pope will need to have that global vision. That doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't worked at the Vatican. I mean, for example, Cardinal Parolin is an Italian, but he's worked in the diplomatic service of the Catholic Church for decades, and he knows the global church. He knows the struggles from the Secretary of State of the church in every country on earth, right? Mm-hmm. He's got that deep, broad vision. So I think that's essential. I think there isn't too much of a Vatican bubble anymore.
Okay.
Right?
I want to go to the phones. Maria is on the line. Maria, we don't have a ton of time, but go ahead.
Yeah, just you were talking about what you want to see in the new pope. And I would say we need someone who's willing to be a little more outraged at the disgusting state of humanity. I mean, Pope Francis made that a comment about the market economy, yet we do nothing about it. And we know war is all about resources and exploitation. And, I think, Christianity, you're supposed to worship God, follow Jesus, but it's turned into worshiping Jesus and following Caesar and collecting his coins. Like, I think the new Pope has to tear a strip off of everybody and get us all to shake our heads. This is not hard to solve the world's problems. It's just we don't want to. We want to pretend to be ignorant, pretend we don't know what to do, and just act like victims. Like, I want the Pope to get angry with people is what I want. And I know some people say, well, no, you can't do that. You got to be kind to people. You know what? There's something called tough love.
All right. Thanks, Maria. I appreciate the perspective. Deacon LaFawn, is there value in anger from a pope in the way that Maria was suggesting?
Well, anger is a very common human emotion. It comes down to a question of how you handle it and what you do with it. Anger is part of us, and we're taught by our parents, how to manage anger. That and lead us to a good place.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about the role, Reed, of the Pope as an activist. We know John Paul II played a significant role in the end of the Cold War, calling for the end of communism. We've talked a little bit about the geopolitics of this one. I think of Gaza, I think of Ukraine. What role do you think this next Pope has as an activist, not only for that, but for the more inclusion of women or people in the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, so I think that the tricky thing about the Pope is that the Pope is called to be both sort of a diplomat, you might say, and also a prophet. And it's not always easy to be both those things, right? Because if you prophetically denounce people, you often burn bridges, right? You burn bridges of dialogue. So, I mean, and for Pope Francis, a really good example of this is that he's been very much a diplomat with China, for example, and sort of normalized relationships with China in a way that hadn't been true for a long time. But was much tougher on European and the U.S. in particular as well, and felt perfectly comfortable speaking with a kind of tough love about particularly questions of refugees. So I think that within the church, some of the issues that you mentioned are sort of intra-church matters, right? So the other thing about the Pope is that part of the Pope's role is to deal with the world outside the church, and the other really primary role is also to mediate relationships within the Catholic Church. And here again, I think that it's difficult because the primary ministry of the Pope in a Catholic ecclesiology is unity, right? So the number one job of the Pope is to keep the church one, to keep it unified. And sometimes that involves making compromises on, that limits the Pope's ability to be an activist. But the Pope sometimes is the one who pushes things forward. John the 23rd famously pushed forward Jewish-Christian and then interfaith dialogue in a way that probably the rest of the church wasn't there yet, and he was able to push that forward. And so I think that for the next Pope, we can expect that Pope to take some stands like that, to move the church, to call the church to move in a particular direction, maybe towards greater inclusion, women, members of the LGBTQ community, maybe somewhere else, right? We don't know exactly what that Pope is going to be, and those issues often look different in a global context. But the Pope will also do a lot of sort of papering over divisions and trying to get people who disagree on a lot of those issues to nevertheless all get on board as being part of one church.
Archbishop Bullen, I think that's a great time to bring you in on this, because locally, that's something that you have to do in the community here in Saskatchewan, is find ways to unify people when it comes to issues that people may disagree on. Women can't lead in the Catholic Church, and there is a history of, I'll call them issues, when it comes to the LGBTQ community. How do you ensure that those people, that women and members of that community, feel represented and welcome in the church?
Well, thank you. I think in terms of the role of women, Pope Francis has really pushed the church and moved This has been a gradual movement to asking women to be in places of leadership. And I mean, I think on a diocesan level here, women are not ordained priests or deacons, but women hold many leadership positions. The director of our pastoral office and of operations is a woman. Our head finance person is a woman. The chairpersons of many parish councils are women. So there are women in significant leadership positions. That doesn't close the conversation or say the conversation is done. I think that the whole thrust towards synodality is a thrust towards engaging in dialogue on precisely this kind of question, saying how can the church pastorally respond? And it starts by listening. It starts by creating structures of deep listening, attentiveness. Wherever we hear pain, wherever we hear struggle, we're called not to come down with hard teaching, but to come down with a posture of listening and dialogue. Can't change church teaching, but we can change practice. We can, so often people in various marginalized communities, when they met with Pope Francis, felt personally affirmed. Mm-hmm. I think about work with victims of clergy sexual abuse and the absolute importance of allowing them voice, of hearing their experience, of hearing the pain, of the profound impact. And that in itself is a start towards healing. So how does the church move locally and internationally on those questions? I think Pope Francis pointed us, at least, in a very pastoral direction. Reed mentioned it right at the start. The Pope wanted to respond to persons, not before ideas. When he encounters a person, he wants to listen and address that person in their life situation.
Okay, quickly, we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to get your hopes for the future of the church. So briefly, if you each could give me your hopes going forward. Reed, I'll start with you.
I mean, my big hope is about synodality, which Archbishop Boland just mentioned, that one of the things that Pope Francis did was sort of imagine a different way that we could discern together, and I definitely hope that continues. Okay,
Deacon LaFond, your hopes for the future of the church.
Well, I really hope that we can continue to look at the world through the eyes of Laudato Si. The world needs us to take care of it so that we can survive and have something for our grandchildren and our great grandchildren that's worth a good life for them.
And last thought to you, Archbishop Boland. We don't have a lot of time.
Thanks. Thanks, Reed. Thanks, Deacon Harry. I resonate with what you've said. Mm-hmm. I mean, mercy, dialogue, a pope who brings strong moral force for the common good for the world and brings unity to the church at the same time. Big task.
No small challenge for whoever is filling those shoes.
Exactly.
Thank you to all three of you for your insights, your expertise, and your kindness today. I know that I've taken some time away from your watching of that tiny chimney, but I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience with all of us. We've been joined today by Archbishop Don Boland, Deacon Harry LaFond, and Reed Laughlin, who's an Associate Professor of Christianity and Culture at St. Michael's College in the University of Toronto. Coming up tomorrow on Blue Sky, we're going to be talking about bike theft. We talked to one person who has had one bike stolen every year for the last 7 years. What is going on? We're going to get some solutions for some bike security and what you can do to make things a little safer for cyclists on the street and ensuring that they actually have a bike to go back to when they leave at the end of their workday. I'm Sam McKeag. Thanks so much for listening today. Have a great afternoon.